Hello guys, welcome to my build guide video for the Vampyr and Unholy Regeneration survival builds. These are two builds that I started working on after being asked for advice from a few people that were relatively new to the game. So with that in mind, I'll start by saying these builds are designed for two types of players, one of course being people who are either new to the game or haven't quite got a grip on learning all of the monster's mechanics and thus struggle to avoid big damage. And the other type of person who can get use out of these builds are perhaps more experienced players who would like to have an off-meta build that they can use to relax whilst testing out new weapon types or just having fun being able to screw around. So say you're a switch axe main and you want to switch onto a longsword to practice those counter mechanics and iframes, etc. These builds are kind of perfect for that. Regarding the two builds themselves, they're pretty much the same, the only difference being the Vampyr build is intended more for those new high rank players who don't yet have access to all of the end game decorations, whereas the Unholy build is one I sort of tweaked for myself that makes more use of high end decos and offers a bit more damage potential. There are a few things I want to go over, so for those who are impatient and want to skip ahead, there will be timestamps in the description so you can go ahead and do that. So the core principles of these builds are of course life regeneration and survivability, while still being able to output what I consider to be viable damage. And viable to me is being able to crit on weak points and seeing numbers that are higher than half of what you would be seeing on a pure maximized damage build. And I'll just say now to give you clarity, the bosses which take me around 3 minutes to kill with a maximum damage build only take me around 4 minutes with the Unholy build, so it's most definitely still viable as a DPS role. You may have seen in the clips at the start examples of the damage mitigation this build offers, but I just want to show you a quick example of the regeneration in effect. So this build makes use of 1 point in Mushroom Monster, which allows us to gain the same effect as an immunizer, which basically boosts your regeneration, and I'll show you 3 examples here. On the far left we've got our regular build with no regeneration enhancements, in the middle we've got our regen build without the boosts of the immunizer effect, and on the right the full effects of the regen build with buffs applied, and by buffs I'm not including food buffs or anything, just the pure raw build with the self buffs applied. And as you can see from the far left to the far right, the results pretty much speak for themselves. So lastly, before we jump into the two builds, both builds are viable with any weapon type, however I do strongly recommend specific trees for whatever weapon you use, and those trees in most cases are going to be either the Nergigante tree or the Valhazak tree. With the Vampyr build, it's going to be the Nergigante tree because, as mentioned before, this build is designed for those who lack endgame decorations such as the sharpness jewel, as well as the gems that get you into white sharpness and help you maintain it. And the thing about the Nergigante weapons is most of them cap out at blue sharpness, which means you don't need those decorations mentioned as they can't increase the sharpness level beyond blue anyway, whilst the Nergigante weapons are great all-round weapons anyway, even considering that they are capped out at blue sharpness. With the Unholy build, I recommend using the Valhazak tree, and in cases where you can't, then the Xenojiva tree, and that is because, especially in Valhazak's case, you're getting white sharpness and then you can build for maintaining that sharpness, as well as an increased affinity on the second augment slot, or in the case of Xeno's tree, extra gem slots. Now of course these aren't the strongest trees in the game in terms of damage potential, but of course we're working with limited decoration slots due to the fact that we're prioritizing a survival build over maximizing damage here. So of course there's going to be some unique situations. For example, with the dual blades, I would recommend just using the Vampyr build with the Nergigante dual blades anyway, due to limitations on what other options are available to you. But with all that said, let's actually jump into the builds themselves, starting with the gear required. Neither of these builds will be making use of event specific armor for the sake of those that don't have them, so feel free to swap those pieces in if you feel it's necessary. So for the Vampyr build, we have our Nergigante weapon. In this case I've got the Dying Light switch axe equipped. We have a defense charm 3, and for our utility, as this is a survival build, we have our 2 most defensive mantles, the Vitality and Rocksteady mantle. For the armor we're running with the Dragon King's eye patch, Valhazak Mail beta, Valhazak Braces beta, and Valhazak Coil beta, as well as the Nergigante Greaves beta. For our decorations, augments and overall stats, we've got 1 defense jewel which will bring our defense boost stat up to level 4, giving us plus 20 with a plus 3 to all elemental resistances. We have 1 tenderizer gem which will bring our weakness exploit to level 3, which is a 50% increased affinity when hitting weak points. Now this deco might be a bit tricky to get for newly high rank players, so don't worry too much if you haven't got it, you'll be fine. And next we have 1 recovery deco that brings us up to level 3 recovery speed, which is of course fundamental to the regeneration aspect of the build, as it essentially quadruples the speed at which we can regenerate our health. And because we're using Valhazak gear, we're able to bypass the max recoverable cap. Basically we can regen our entire health bar rather than the default, which is only up until the point where you had health before you got hit. Next we have another deco that might be hard for you to obtain, and that is the Fungiform decoration. Now what this allows you to do is eat certain mushrooms, and at level one that will let us consume blue mushrooms and toadstools. Now with the toadstool, that is going to be your main buff that you apply to yourself that will give you like 5 minutes of the immunizer effect that lets you regen health faster. If you don't have this decoration, you'll just have to craft or transmute immunizer potions and use those. But with the decoration, you can also make use of blue mushrooms, which act as a mini instant health potion. So whilst they're not going to give you as much health as a max potion, it is instant unlike regular potions that you have to drink. So it's very useful to just pop and go and let the regen take care of the rest. For the next 2 decos, these are flexible for you to take what you want. I thought 2 protection gems would be good here just to offer further damage mitigation, but you might want to put in vitality decos here. The reason I don't use vitality with this build is because you'll notice that we have level 2 peak performance, which takes effect at maximum health. Now, from what I can tell, and I may be wrong, is life regeneration isn't percent based, meaning the bigger the health bar, the longer it takes to reach full health by regeneration. So logically, the shorter the time it takes to reach full health, the more time you're going to be spending with peak performance active, which is essentially a DPS increase. And the survivability is already incredibly strong without the need for a larger health bar, so for me it makes sense to forego the vitality in favour of a different form of damage mitigation that doesn't sacrifice more damage potential. We then have 3 medicine decos that increase the amount of health gained by 30% when using restoration items, etc., which synergizes really well with the blue mushroom trick combined with support items such as life powders. Basically, when healing teammates, you're actually going to get a decent heal off on yourself, which encourages you to help others out even though they're not going to be benefiting from the increased 30% heal that you are. And finally, another optional decoration is the Mighty Jewel. Now, I personally have this here because I've got a Switch Axe equipped, and the Switch Axe weapon greatly benefits from maximum might as it doesn't really use stamina during the main DPS rotation. So you're getting like 20% free affinity with a level 2 in maximum might, but you might want to switch this out for something else if you're using a very stamina intensive weapon such as the Jewel Blades in Demon mode. So that's that build. Now let's take a look at the Unholy Build, which is what I use the most out of the 2. It's pretty much the same gear but with 2 core differences. Firstly, we're running with a different tree for this weapon. As mentioned before, that's going to be the Valhazak tree. And we're also using the Death Stench Hill Beta because the 2 points in handicraft that it gives is what brings us into white sharpness. And the decorations we're going to need for this build is 1 tenderizer gem for the level 3 weakness exploit and a sharp jewel. So we only have that little sliver of white sharpness, so this decoration is essential to the build in order to be able to maintain that white sharpness. We then have that 1 recovery deco for the level 3 recovery speed and 3 grinder gems. Now, some people don't like to use 3 grinder gems because they think 1 or 2 is enough, but there are 2 reasons why I run with all 3, and they are, firstly, having level 3 speed sharpening allows you to almost instantly get off a sharpen in the middle of combat, even in those situations where the monster just seems to get aggroed when you start sharpening, as well as the fact that you only have that tiny sliver of white sharpness, so we're actually sharpening pretty frequently with this build. And the second reason is these deco slots are only level 1 anyway, so there isn't really any other decos that I would put in here over the grinder jewel, so I just advise to go all out with speed sharpening. We then, of course, just like the Vampyr build, have our 3 medicine jewels and a defense jewel and the fungiform jewel. And that's pretty much the builds done. Now, usually when I make these videos, I always forget something or I make one stupid mistake somewhere. So if that's the case here, please have a quick glance over the comments where I usually pin an update if I discover anything after the editing process. And of course, if you have anything to add yourself or any suggestions in how you would improve the build, or if you simply have any questions, please feel free to make yourself heard in the comments. The last thing I would like to add is that, and this is aimed more for those new players who are just trying to improve at Monster Hunter, these type of builds are great for the early stages of learning because there's less pressure when studying the enemy's combat patterns. However, as most experienced players will know, Monster Hunter combat is more about damage avoidance than damage mitigation, so you will rarely see experienced players running with defensive builds like this. It's far more optimal to be able to avoid damage altogether and maximize the damage capability of your build, with the exception of support builds. So by all means, enjoy these builds, but when the time comes, try and be brave enough to remove the training wheels and get the full experience of Monster Hunter combat that I believe is the most fun you can have in this game. With that said, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed the video and or if you found it helpful, feel free to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing for more Monster Hunter content coming soon. Okay guys, take care.